The fact that investigators discovered the so-called bomb factory in Leeds doesn't mean it was used specifically for the 7/7 attacks, especially when high-grade explosives had already been discovered and acted upon. It's possible that two forms of explosive were used, one high-grade or military, and the other homemade to add to the devastation or act as a primer for the explosion like a fuse. The narrative was carelessly released before a proper conclusion was reached, but the prevailing theory given to the public through the media is that TATP, or triacetone triperoxide, is what was found at the bomb factory. The idea being that they used nail polish remover, bleach, and other easily obtainable substances. The two types of explosive theory is the only one that currently fits all scenarios released by the authorities, because TATP on its own explodes without flames or any substantial heat, rather an extremely fast gaseous reaction. Richard Reed, the shoe bomber, used the double explosive technique himself. His shoes contained a high-grade C4 explosive, but the TATP chemical was used as the primer for the detonating device. In other words, it would react and then set off the C4. TATP without a higher grade explosive is inconsistent with the damage caused on 7/7 and the eyewitness accounts. This being said, is it possible that two parties could have been involved? The bombers with their homemade bombs, and an outside group with strong connections using military explosives from the Balkans? Or were the bombers themselves part of a wider network of terrorists, and did they use C4? It's impossible to explain the massive contradiction, and only leads to further speculation. What is clear is that somebody somewhere is distorting what information gets released to the public. Several images were released after the bombings showing the trains and inside the carriages. Unfortunately, none of them show a clear or consistent view of the blast sites. The official narrative claims the bombers placed their rucksacks on the floor and that the explosions were inside the carriages. But conflicting eyewitness reports suggest some bombs may have been placed under the carriages and blasts came up through the floor. If this was the case, we'd expect to see bits of metal frayed and pointing upwards. This won't be clear without full disclosure of all carriage images, although off-duty police lady Lizzie Kenworthy did describe how one victim was impaled when metal had twisted up through the middle of the carriage. At the Edgware Road attack, eyewitnesses initially told Guardian reporter Mark Hollingsbaum that blasts came from beneath the trains.
This is Mark Hollingsbaum reporting from the London Hilton Hotel opposite Edgware Road station, where we believe there was an explosion this morning under the carriage of a train. What seems to have happened is that sometime around 9:30 this morning, passengers in a train from Edgware Road travelling to Paddington, they'd just left Edgware Road station when suddenly they felt they had a massive explosion. And some passengers described how the tiles, the covers on the floor of the train suddenly flew up, raised up, and
months later, he said other witnesses thought the bombs were on the train and that he didn't want to be used in conspiracy theories. But there are many more eyewitnesses that remember a similar thing.
But feeling it as well, you know, tremors, shiver all the way up through your body. My whole body shook, and this floor panel came up underneath my feet. I actually thought I was dead at the time because I could see nothing or hear nothing, and I remember squeezing my legs, squeezing them because I thought that they were gone.
A further eyewitness, Anita Kinsley, said the tiles on the floor of my carriage suddenly shot up. Also, Sean Barron, who was helping victims, said one gentleman told him the floor of the train had blown up.
In the one train at Edgware Road, one of the patients who I was dealing with inside the hotel described a large hole which had been blown in the floor, and I believe in the process one gentleman was either thrown out of the train or fell through the hole, but he was pinned underneath one of the trains.
Eyewitness Bruce Late of the Liverpool Aldgate blast told the Cambridge Evening News, "The policeman said, 'Mind that hole, that's where the bomb was.' The metal was pushed upwards as if the bomb was underneath the train. They seemed to think the bomb was left in a bag, but I don't remember anybody being where the bomb was, or any bag."
As I was getting off the train, I noticed that there was a hole, and the hole was as if there was a bomb or the explosion had burst up through the floor of the train, and that was just about there.
So there is definitely a contradiction here. If the official narrative was based off eyewitness accounts, why did the writer only pick one version of accounts, the version with the least publicly available witness statements? If it was based on photo evidence, it would be in the public's best interest to see all of that photo evidence. Interestingly, 2 days after the attacks, investigators were convinced that only one bomber died in the blasts, Hasib Hussein on the number 30 bus. Were the tube bombings even suicide attacks at all? Some media were given information that the bombs were timed explosions, detonated by mobile phones. On the day itself, investigators said the bombs were detonated by timers, and then ABC News cited British police stating that they found timing devices and believed the bombs were left in packages rather than being on the bomber's person. The UK Mirror pointed out how illogical it would have been to buy return train tickets and to pay for parking. Why didn't they praise Allah before setting off the bombs like in other suicide attacks? Later, others wondered why one of the alleged bombers would argue about being shortchanged at the petrol station when he was about to die. A CNN report sums up that the bombs were made of high explosives, contained synchronized timing devices, and were probably not triggered by suicide bombers. If you couple this with witness accounts that the explosions came from under the carriages, and a lack of evidence that any of them were even on the trains, we have a worryingly more complex version than was released to the public. It's not a far stretch to think this was a highly sophisticated operation conducted by a powerful wider network or even military. Of course, nobody is stating that this nightmare scenario is the fact of what happened, but without a real independent public inquiry, we're only left with logical speculation.